The US President Donald Trump's decision to impose a whopping 50% tariffs on India, a strategic ally of the United States, has come as a surprise for many at a time when many believe that this could be indicative of a relationship which wasn't or isn't perhaps as hunky-dory as many expected it to be. Is there a change in the way this relationship is going? Joining us now for his views, the former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton, one of America's finest diplomats. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. First up, the entire tariff policy and its implications. Now, you've described President Trump's tariffs on India, particularly the 50% tariffs, including the 25% secondary tariffs over Russian oil purchases, as an enormous mistake. Why do you believe that these tariffs might undermine the strategic partnership between Washington and Delhi?
Well, first of all, I don't think the tariff assault that Trump is waging on the entire world makes any sense. I think there are obviously problems in international trade. I think China is the biggest problem. I think it discriminates against a lot of its partners, steals their intellectual property. If you want to deal with China, the smart thing to do is get your friends and allies together who are also victims and try and have a concerted policy, not declare war on everybody at the same time. I think it has been an American view across administrations that India has a lot of tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. With our closest friends, up until Donald Trump, the approach was to try and get to zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, zero subsidies. Hard to do, but that's the objective. Trump has rejected that, and I think it's a mistake, especially in the bilateral U.S.-India relationship. And on top of that, according to pretty reliable press reports, the Indian negotiators thought they were right on the verge of a deal with Trump when he suddenly decided that the tariff would be 25%, essentially unilaterally, which was an unnecessary insult, really, to India on Trump's part. Okay, so then on top of that, just to make things worse, because Trump had begun to run out of belief that he and Vladimir Putin were really friends and possible to make a ceasefire in Ukraine, he made his deadline and threats of additional tariffs against Russia, secondary tariffs against purchasers of Russian oil and gas, which now, looking back on it just a few weeks ago, has left India as the only country with any consequences for purchases of Russian oil and gas. Even Russia didn't get additional tariffs. Russia got a summit between Putin and Trump on American soil in what used to be Russian Alaska before we bought it from them. No tariffs, no secondary sanctions on China at all, despite it being a much bigger purchaser of Russian oil and gas than India or anybody else. So there's a lot here, a lot to unwrap, but the net of all this is that India is the one government that suffered from Trump's effort to get a ceasefire in Ukraine. It's completely backwards, and I don't need to explain to your audience just how damaging it is to advancing the U.S.-India relationship.
Ambassador Bolton, you warned that the tariffs could push India closer to Russia, possibly even China. But how do you assess the risk of India deepening ties with Moscow? Because that's something that the U.S. wouldn't look favorably upon in any case.
Well, I think that Russia will try and take advantage of this to try and keep India close, both on the sale of high-end military equipment and on continued purchase of oil and gas. I think, according to reports, Putin will be visiting India later this year for the first time in quite some time. And I think China will take the same approach. I understand they've invited Prime Minister Modi to go to Beijing. Now, I don't think any of this is irreversible. But I think when you make a mistake as big as the way the White House has ended up treating India over the past 30 days, it takes a long time to restore trust and confidence and really a belief in good faith. I think most Americans are stunned at what Trump has done on the tariff front and are beginning to appreciate not just the economic damage that this is causing, but the political and diplomatic damage as well.
Ambassador, there's this changed relationship with Pakistan as well. The recent visits of the Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir to the United States, nuclear saber rattling by Munir from American soil India and Pakistan sort of slug it out on social media and have been issuing very strong statements against each other. That's one thing. But for Munir to make this on American soil, and the fact that he's met Trump for lunch in the not too distant past, does this indicate a renewed or a changed relationship between Islamabad and Washington?
I don't think so necessarily. I think it probably reflects General Munir and the Pakistani regime figuring out a better way to play Donald Trump, to appeal to him, to flatter him, as I think General Munir did in nominating him for a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, this has nothing to do with key U.S.-Pakistani interests or the many issues that remain to be resolved. But it's a demonstration of how you deal with Donald Trump and his erratic behavior. So my only suggestion to Prime Minister Modi might be that he could offer to nominate Trump twice for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, at this stage, that might actually be an idea. Ambassador Bolton, there's also been this difference on the U.S. role in Operation Sindoor, or at the end of it. That's when India and Pakistan, I use the word war because it was fairly intense for a period of 88 hours. Now, India has maintained that the ceasefire following this 4-day military escalation, was between India and Pakistan, and that Trump claims credit for ending it, whereas people I've spoken to very high in the government say that that's not the case at all. How do you interpret this basic discrepancy between what Delhi insists, right? When they said it's an India-Pakistan issue, Pakistan came to the ceasefire table, there was never any discussion of trade, whereas Trump said, look, I've gone and ended a potential nuclear conflict.
Well, this is part of Trump's campaign for a Nobel Peace Prize, and he will take credit for almost anything. He repeats it regularly. He has taken credit, for example, to ending a war between Serbia and Kosovo that nobody in Serbia or Kosovo thought they were fighting. I mean, there are obviously differences and tensions there, but not a war recently. So all I can say is he's not treating India any differently than he treats many others. He's not singling India out. But it's Donald Trump playing for Donald Trump. I mean, I was National Security Advisor during a somewhat similar terrorist attack in 2019, and we had conversations with senior officials in the government of India and the government of Pakistan. I don't know what our role was, if it made any difference or not, but we certainly wanted to try and be helpful. And the two governments ended up de-escalating again, as they've done more recently. So I think I don't want to criticize Trump for at least offering his services, but I also think it's obviously untenable to claim credit for something that the two governments worked out between themselves.
All right, Ambassador Bolton, great speaking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, thanks for having me.